Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the channel. America's transformation from a rural agrarian society to the world's largest superpower is one of the most dramatic economic shifts in history. Just 2 centuries ago, the United States was a young nation primarily composed of small farms and local economies. Yet by the 20th century, it had become the leading industrial and military power on the planet. How did this happen? What forces drove this rapid rise? The answer lies in industrialization, the engine that powered America's ascent to global dominance. The process of industrialization reshaped every aspect of American life. Factories replaced family-run workshops, railroads stitched together, a vast nation and new technologies revolutionized production and communication. This wasn't just a matter of economic growth, it was a complete restructuring of society. The rise of mechanized production increased efficiency, allowing businesses to produce goods on an unprecedented scale. The expansion of railroads and steamships connected markets like never before, making it possible to transport raw materials and finished products across the country and beyond. Meanwhile, waves of immigrants provided the labor force needed to fuel this expansion, settling in booming industrial cities that became the economic powerhouses of the nation. Industrialization didn't just make America wealthier, it reshaped its global standing. With abundant natural resources, a rapidly growing workforce, and a culture of innovation, the United States quickly surpassed European powers in industrial output. This economic strength translated into political and military influence, allowing America to project power across the world. The emergence of mass production, led by figures like Henry Ford, not only revolutionized industry, but also made the United States the model for modern capitalism. Yet this rapid transformation came with its challenges. Industrialization led to harsh working conditions, economic inequality, and the rise of powerful monopolies that controlled entire industries. It sparked labor movements, government reforms, and social struggles that defined much of America's history. But despite these growing pains, the economic revolution set the stage for the United States to become the dominant force of the 20th and 21st centuries. At its core, industrialization was the defining factor in America's rise to global power. It turned a largely rural nation into an economic and military powerhouse, creating the foundation for modern America. In this video, we'll explore how this transformation happened, who the key players were, and how the legacy of industrialization continues to shape the world today. Before the rise of industry, America was largely an agrarian society. The early economy revolved around farming, with most families producing just enough to sustain themselves. Small-scale production, known as cottage industries, played a role in local economies. Families would spin thread, weave cloth, or craft metal tools in their homes, selling or trading goods within their communities. There were no large factories, no mechanized production, and no nationwide distribution networks. Instead, people relied on manual labor and traditional techniques passed down through generations. However, across the Atlantic, a revolution was underway. The British Industrial Revolution had begun in the late 18th century, introducing mechanized production that dramatically increased efficiency. New machines like the spinning jenny and the water frame allowed textiles to be produced at an unprecedented rate, shifting manufacturing from small workshops to massive mills. Britain's factories were churning out goods on a scale that America could hardly compete with, and as a result, the young United States depended heavily on British imports. But that was about to change. American industrialists and inventors closely watched Britain's progress, eager to replicate and improve upon its technology. In some cases, they went as far as smuggling blueprints or luring skilled British workers to America to help jumpstart the industry. One of the most famous examples was Samuel Slater, an English textile worker who memorized the designs of British spinning machines and brought them to America in 1790. He built the first successful water-powered textile mill in Rhode Island, earning him the nickname Father of the American Industrial Revolution. This marked the beginning of America's transition from handcraft production to mechanized industry. Several key inventions accelerated this shift. The spinning jenny, originally developed in Britain, allowed multiple threads to be spun at once, significantly increasing textile production. The water frame, another British innovation, used water power to automate spinning, reducing the need for skilled labor. But one of the most impactful inventions came from an American, Eli Whitney's cotton gin. Invented in 1793, this device revolutionized the cotton industry by making it far easier to separate cotton fibers from seeds. Previously, this had been a time-consuming, labor-intensive process. With the cotton gin, cotton production exploded, fueling the growth of America's textile industry. However, the cotton gin had an unintended and devastating consequence. It intensified the demand for enslaved labor. Cotton quickly became the backbone of the Southern economy, and as plantations expanded, so did the brutal system of slavery. Before the cotton gin, some had predicted that slavery might gradually fade away, as it was becoming less profitable. Instead, the efficiency of cotton processing made it one of the most valuable commodities in the world, and plantation owners sought more enslaved people to meet the rising demand. By the mid-19th century, the American South was supplying over 75% of the world's cotton, much of which was sent to British and northern U.S. textile mills. This created a paradox. While the North was rapidly industrializing, much of its early economic growth was deeply tied to the labor of enslaved people in the South. Northern textile factories thrived on cheap cotton, and many banks and insurance companies built their wealth by financing Southern plantations. This system of early capitalism, where industrial progress in one region depended on forced labor in another, set the stage for deep economic and political tensions that would later erupt in the Civil War. By the early 19th century, America was no longer just an agrarian nation. The foundations of industrialization had been laid, and the country was beginning to shift toward a new economic model. The influence of British technology, combined with American innovation, was setting the stage for a manufacturing boom that would transform the nation's landscape. The next step in this journey would be the rise of factories, transportation networks, and mass production, which would catapult America onto the world stage as an industrial powerhouse. By the early 19th century, America was beginning to embrace industrialization, but it was still heavily dependent on British goods. Many American businesses relied on imported textiles, machinery, and manufactured products. However, a major turning point came with the War of 1812. When the United States went to war with Britain, trade between the two nations was effectively cut off. British naval blockades prevented American merchants from importing essential goods, forcing the country to rely on its own industries for survival. This sudden disruption exposed a critical weakness. America was too dependent on foreign manufacturing. As a result, the war became a catalyst for rapid industrial expansion. With British imports unavailable, American entrepreneurs seized the opportunity to develop domestic industries. The U.S. government also encouraged this shift by imposing tariffs on foreign goods after the war, making American-made products more competitive. This protectionist approach helped industries flourish, particularly in the Northeast, where factory towns began to emerge. By the 1820s, industrialization was in full swing, marking the beginning of America's manufacturing dominance. One of the earliest and most famous examples of large-scale factory production in the U.S. was the Lowell Mills in Massachusetts. Named after Francis Cabot Lowell, these textile mills introduced a new way of organizing labor and production. Unlike earlier mills that relied on entire families working together, the Lowell system recruited young women, often from rural areas, to work in factories under strict supervision. These Lowell girls lived in company-owned dormitories and followed regimented work schedules, marking a dramatic shift from the independence of agrarian life to the rigid structure of factory labor. The rise of factories fundamentally changed how Americans worked. Before industrialization, most people were self-employed or worked in small-scale businesses where they had control over their tasks and schedules. Factory work, however, introduced long hours, repetitive tasks, and strict management. Labor was no longer based on skill alone. Machines allowed employers to hire unskilled workers who could operate simple tasks at a fast pace. This transformation led to increased productivity, but also sparked early labor movements as workers protested. Harsh conditions, long hours, and low wages. As industries grew, so did the need for better transportation networks. The early 19th century saw a revolution in transportation that connected markets and fueled industrial expansion. Steam engines, canals, and railroads became the arteries of the growing economy. The Erie Canal, completed in 1825, linked the Great Lakes to the Hudson River, dramatically lowering transportation costs and allowing goods to flow more efficiently between the Midwest and the East Coast. This canal alone transformed cities like New York into major commercial hubs. Railroads soon took transportation to an entirely new level. The first major rail lines appeared in the 1830s, and by the 1850s, a vast railroad network crisscrossed the country. Trains moved raw materials like coal, iron, and cotton to factories and delivered finished goods to markets faster than ever before. The expansion of railroads not only boosted industry, but also helped settlers move westward, accelerating the nation's territorial and economic growth. The combination of steam-powered boats and railroads made America's economy more interconnected than ever, turning it into a continental powerhouse. As factories and transportation networks expanded, so did the demand for labor. Industrial growth attracted millions of immigrants seeking economic opportunity. In the mid-19th century, waves of Irish, German, and other European immigrants arrived in America, many of them settling in rapidly growing cities. These immigrants became the backbone of the workforce, taking on jobs in factories, construction, and transportation. Their labor built railroads, operated textile mills, and fueled the steel industry. However, this immigration boom also led to social tensions. Many native-born Americans feared that immigrants would take jobs and drive down wages, leading to anti-immigrant movements and political backlash. Despite this resistance, immigrant labor was essential to America's industrial rise. Without the influx of workers, many industries would not have been able to sustain their rapid growth. By the mid-19th century, the United States had firmly established itself as an industrializing nation. The combination of war-driven self-sufficiency, the rise of factory production, transportation innovations, and immigrant labor had transformed the economy. America was no longer just a nation of farmers. It was on its way to becoming an industrial giant, setting the stage for even greater expansion in the decades to come. The period after the Civil War saw an explosion of industrial growth in America, so much so that historians call it the Gilded Age, a time of immense wealth and technological advancement, but also deep social inequality. Between the 1870s and early 1900s, America became an industrial powerhouse, driven by groundbreaking innovations, massive infrastructure projects, and the rise of corporate giants. However, beneath the surface of progress lay a reality of worker exploitation, political corruption, and social unrest. At the heart of this industrial revolution were a handful of powerful businessmen, often called robber barons by their critics and captains of industry by their supporters. These men controlled entire industries, amassing unprecedented levels of wealth and reshaping the American economy. John D. Rockefeller revolutionized the oil industry through his company, Standard Oil. Using aggressive business tactics, he eliminated competitors and created one of the first monopolies in American history. By refining oil more efficiently and controlling every aspect of production, from drilling to transportation, Rockefeller dominated global oil markets, setting the stage for the modern petroleum industry. Andrew Carnegie, a Scottish immigrant, built a steel empire that fueled America's rapid expansion. His company, Carnegie Steel, supplied the material for skyscrapers, bridges, railroads, and battleships. Carnegie embraced new technologies like the Bessemer process, which allowed for mass production of steel at lower costs, making it possible to construct the cities and industries that defined modern America. Cornelius Vanderbilt transformed transportation through his control of railroads. He built a vast rail network that connected distant regions, slashing travel times and making it easier to move goods across the country. His ruthless business practices helped him dominate the industry, laying the foundation for America's transportation boom. J.P. Morgan, the banker and financier, consolidated industries by buying out struggling companies and merging them into powerful corporations. He played a key role in stabilizing the economy during financial crises and was instrumental in the creation of General Electric and U.S. Steel, two companies that shaped America's industrial future. This led to the rise of the labor movement. Workers began organizing strikes and forming unions to demand better wages, shorter hours, and safer workplaces. The Knights of Labor and the American Federation of Labor, AFL, emerged as powerful labor organizations, pushing for reforms through strikes, protests, and negotiations. Some of the most famous labor conflicts of the era included the Haymarket Riot of 1886, where a peaceful labor protest in Chicago turned violent, and the Homestead Strike of 1892, where steelworkers clashed with Carnegie's private security forces. These conflicts highlighted the growing divide between industrial giants and the working class. Despite resistance from business leaders and government crackdowns, the labor movement gradually gained victories. Laws were eventually passed to improve working conditions, limit child labor, and introduce the 8-hour workday. However, the struggle between labor and industry would continue well into the 20th century. The Gilded Age was a time of both remarkable progress and deep inequality. The titans of industry built the foundations of modern America, creating the infrastructure, energy, and financial systems that still shape the country today. But their success came at a cost. Millions of workers toiled in harsh conditions, and economic inequality reached unprecedented levels. As the United States moved into the 20th century, the fight between industry, government, and labor would define the next phase of America's development, setting the stage for major reforms in the progressive era. As America entered the 20th century, the explosive industrial growth of the Gilded Age had created both unprecedented prosperity and deep economic inequality. While industrial titans like Rockefeller, Carnegie, and J.P. Morgan amassed vast fortunes, millions of workers struggled in harsh conditions. The gap between the rich and poor had widened, and monopolies, companies that controlled entire industries, dominated the economy. This imbalance led to widespread public outcry and demands for government intervention, marking the beginning of the progressive era. One of the defining figures of this period was President Theodore Roosevelt, who took office in 1901. Unlike his predecessors, Roosevelt believed that unchecked corporate power was a threat to democracy. He saw monopolies known as trusts as stifling competition, inflating prices, and exploiting workers. While he didn't oppose big business outright, he insisted that corporations should be held accountable to the public interest. This philosophy became known as trust busting. Roosevelt used the Sherman Antitrust Act of 1890, a law designed to break up monopolies but rarely enforced before his presidency, to take action against corporate giants. One of his most famous targets was the Northern Securities Company, a massive railroad trust controlled by J.P. Morgan. In 1904, the Supreme Court ruled in favor of the government, ordering the breakup of Northern Securities. This victory signaled a shift in federal policy, proving that even the wealthiest businessmen were not above the law. Roosevelt's administration continued its crackdown on monopolies, taking on Standard Oil, the meatpacking industry, and other powerful trusts. His efforts paved the way for future antitrust legislation, ensuring that industries remained competitive and that economic power was not concentrated in the hands of a few. The breakup of monopolies didn't just limit corporate dominance, it allowed smaller businesses to thrive, fostering innovation and economic diversity. As the government was reshaping the economy through regulation, a wave of new technologies was reshaping everyday life. One of the most transformative developments of the early 20th century was electricity. While Thomas Edison had introduced the electric light bulb in the late 19th century, it wasn't until the early 20th century that electricity became widespread. Power plants and electrical grids expanded, lighting up cities, powering factories, and changing how Americans lived and worked. The availability of electric power led to the creation of household appliances, extended working hours, and a boom in industrial productivity. Another revolutionary development was the automobile. While cars had existed in the late 19th century, they were expensive, unreliable, and considered luxury items. That changed with Henry Ford and his introduction of the assembly line. In 1913, Ford revolutionized manufacturing by streamlining car production, significantly reducing costs. His Model T, which debuted in 1908, became the first car affordable to the average American. Before Ford's innovations, cars were hand-built and out of reach for most people. The assembly line made mass production possible, cutting manufacturing time from 12 hours per car to just 90 minutes. The impact of the automobile was enormous. It gave Americans newfound mobility, allowing people to live farther from city centers, which contributed to the growth of suburbs. The demand for cars also fueled other industries, including steel, rubber, and oil. Gas stations, motels, and roadside businesses sprang up, creating an entirely new sector of the economy. By the 1920s, the automobile industry had become a cornerstone of American life, symbolizing the nation's technological progress and economic might. With advancements in industry, infrastructure, and innovation, the United States emerged as the world's leading economic power. By the time World War I began in 1914, America was producing more steel, oil, and manufactured goods than any other nation. The war further accelerated economic expansion, as American factories supplied weapons, food, and materials to allied nations. By the end of the war, the U.S. had overtaken Britain as the world's financial center, and Wall Street replaced London as the global hub of banking and investment. This transformation from an agrarian society to an industrial superpower was nothing short of extraordinary. In just over a century, the United States had gone from a collection of small farms and local markets to the dominant force in global economics. The Progressive Era's reforms helped balance economic growth with social responsibility, while technological innovations propelled the country into a new age of prosperity. As America moved forward, it was no longer just an industrial powerhouse. It was becoming the leader of the modern world. By the early 20th century, the United States had already established itself as a leading industrial power. However, it was the global conflicts of World War I and World War II that truly cemented America's dominance on the world stage. War production required massive industrial output, fueling technological advancements, economic expansion, and a permanent shift toward global leadership. When World War I broke out in 1914, the U.S. initially remained neutral, supplying weapons, food, and raw materials to European allies. American factories, which had already been growing due to industrialization, ramped up production to meet the demands of war. Steel mills, shipyards, and ammunition plants operated at full capacity, transforming the economy almost overnight. By the time the U.S. entered the war in 1917, its industrial infrastructure was well positioned to support the war effort. The mass production techniques pioneered by Henry Ford's automobile industry were applied to weapons manufacturing, allowing for the rapid production of tanks, planes, and artillery. The economic benefits of the war were immense. Millions of jobs were created, wages rose, and industries expanded. By the war's end in 1918, the United States had become the world's largest creditor nation, surpassing Britain in financial power. While Europe struggled to rebuild, America entered the 1920s as an economic superpower. However, it was World War II that truly solidified America's industrial dominance. After the attack on Pearl Harbor in 1941, the U.S. fully mobilized for war. Factories that once produced consumer goods were converted into war production plants almost overnight. Automobile manufacturers like Ford and General Motors stopped making cars and instead built tanks, aircraft, and military vehicles. Women entered the workforce in unprecedented numbers, symbolized by Rosie the Riveter, as millions of men went to fight. The sheer scale of American production was staggering. By 1945, the U.S. had produced nearly 300,000 aircraft, 88,000 tanks, and over 2 million military vehicles. The country's shipyards churned out warships and cargo vessels at an astonishing rate, supplying Allied forces with the materials needed to defeat Axis powers. This industrial might was a decisive factor in the war's outcome. Unlike European nations whose infrastructure was devastated by bombings, America emerged from the war with its industries intact and more powerful than ever. With victory in World War II, the U.S. entered a new era of economic expansion known as the post-war boom. Millions of returning soldiers benefited from the GI Bill, which provided education and housing assistance, helping to create a highly skilled workforce. The demand for homes led to the rise of suburbs, with mass-produced housing developments, like Levittown offering affordable homes for middle-class families. The automobile industry boomed as suburban expansion increased the need for personal transportation. At the same time, the Cold War with the Soviet Union ushered in a new era of industrial expansion focused on defense and technology. The U.S. military-industrial complex, a term coined by President Dwight Eisenhower, became a permanent fixture of the economy. Billions of dollars were invested in weapons development, missile technology, and nuclear arms production. Companies like Boeing, Lockheed Martin, and Raytheon thrived as defense contracts fueled their growth. The Cold War also led to rapid advancements in space exploration and technology. The launch of the Soviet satellite Sputnik in 1957 sparked the space race, pushing the U.S. to invest heavily in science and engineering. NASA was founded in 1958, and by 1969, America had landed a man on the moon. This era of technological competition not only advanced aerospace and military industries, but also laid the foundation for the modern tech boom. By the late 20th century, America had firmly established itself as the world's leading industrial and technological power. The combination of war-driven industrialization, post-war consumerism, and Cold War advancements created an economy that was unmatched in scale and influence. From producing steel and automobiles to leading the world, in computing and aerospace, the United States had transitioned from an industrial powerhouse to a global superpower. This transformation set the stage for the modern digital age, where technology and industry continue to define America's dominance on the world stage. As America moved into the late 20th and early 21st centuries, its industrial landscape underwent a profound transformation. The nation that once dominated global manufacturing shifted toward a new kind of economic power, one driven by technology, innovation, and services, rather than heavy industry. The rise of Silicon Valley, the decline of traditional manufacturing, and the challenges of globalization reshaped America's role in the global economy, leading to the question, is the U.S. still an industrial superpower? One of the most significant developments of the modern era has been the rise of the technology industry. While the Industrial Revolution of the 19th century was built on steel, oil, and railroads, the new revolution of the late 20th century was driven by computers, software, and the internet. Silicon Valley, located in California, became the epicenter of this technological boom. Companies like Apple, Microsoft, Google, and Facebook, now Meta, emerged as global leaders, shifting America's economic focus from manufacturing physical goods to developing software, digital services, and artificial intelligence. The microprocessor, invented in the 1970s, laid the foundation for the digital age. Computing power advanced rapidly, leading to personal computers, the internet, and eventually smartphones, which transformed daily life and business worldwide. By the early 2000s, the U.S. was no longer just an industrial powerhouse. It was a technological empire. Silicon Valley companies dominated global markets, and American innovation led to breakthroughs in artificial intelligence, automation, and cloud computing. However, while the tech industry flourished, traditional manufacturing in America declined. The late 20th century saw a shift toward globalization, with companies outsourcing production to countries where labor was cheaper. China, India, and Mexico became major manufacturing hubs, producing everything from electronics to automobiles at lower costs. American factories, once the heart of economic growth, shut down in large numbers, particularly in regions like the Midwest, which became known as the Rust Belt due to the decline of heavy industry. Globalization brought new challenges. While outsourcing reduced production costs and increased corporate profits, it also led to job losses and economic instability in many American communities. Factory towns that had thrived during the industrial boom faced economic decline, and millions of blue-collar workers were displaced. The rise of automation further complicated the issue. Robots and AI-driven systems replaced human labor in factories, making even domestic manufacturing less reliant on workers. Despite these changes, America has not lost its status as a global industrial leader. It has simply evolved. The U.S. remains at the forefront of high-tech manufacturing, particularly in industries like aerospace, pharmaceuticals, and semiconductor production. Companies like Tesla have revitalized American manufacturing through electric vehicles and battery production. Additionally, the push for reshoring, bringing production back to the U.S., has gained momentum, especially in critical industries like microchips and medical supplies. The question remains, is America still an industrial superpower? The answer depends on how one defines industrial strength. While the country no longer leads in mass manufacturing like it did in the mid-20th century, it remains a dominant force in high-tech industries, research and development, and innovation. The U.S. leads the world in AI, space exploration, biotechnology, and software, shaping the future of global industry. Looking ahead, the next industrial revolution will likely be driven by artificial intelligence, quantum computing, renewable energy, and biotechnology. America is at the forefront of these fields, but it faces competition from rising powers like China. The challenge for the U.S. is not just maintaining economic dominance, but ensuring that technological advancements benefit all sectors of society, preventing economic inequality from deepening further. Ultimately, America's industrial power has transformed rather than disappeared. The nation that once built steel bridges and railroads now builds AI-driven economies and space technology. Whether it remains the world's leading superpower will depend on how it adapts to the next wave of technological and economic change. Over the course of more than 2 centuries, industry has shaped America's rise from a rural economy to the world's leading superpower. From the textile mills of the early 19th century to the steel and oil empires of the Gilded Age, from the war-driven industrial booms of the 20th century to the high-tech revolution of today, the ability to innovate, adapt, and lead in industry has been the driving force behind America's global dominance. But as history has shown, no era of industrial power lasts forever. Manufacturing has declined, automation is replacing jobs, and globalization has reshaped the economy. The U.S. is no longer the factory of the world, but it remains at the forefront of technological advancement. The future of industry may not be in steel and coal, but in AI, biotech, space exploration, and green energy. So what's next? Will America continue to lead the world in the industries of the future, or will other nations take the lead? That's where you come in. Let me know in the comments. Will the U.S. remain an industrial powerhouse, or are we witnessing the decline of an empire? Let's start a discussion.